we are excited to have you here today, Kurian. That's how to pronounce the name, right?
Kurian Tharakan, yeah.
Yes.
Very good favorite. That's good.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you spending time with me today because this is a new month and I'm excited to hear the stories that you have that's going to impact our audience because we really understand that communication is valuable when people perceive the context behind the conversation.
Yeah, that's great. Let's do it. You know, yes. I got lots of little stories for you along the way.
Oh yeah? Okay. I'm looking forward to hearing that. Would you like to tell us more about who you are, what you do, and just give us a little background, if that's okay?
Sure. My name is Kurian Tharakan. I'm the founder of a marketing strategy company called Strategy Sales and Marketing Advisors. And from that perspective, we are, helping a lot of startup companies and perhaps new initiatives within larger companies to get out into the marketplace, get that initial traction, scale in the marketplace, and make an impact, of some kind, so that the brand comes alive in people's minds. So that's the advisory part of that. I'm also a partner in a digital marketing company called Socialite Communications. And that's the agency that we have. I've got a couple of partners. We have maybe 14 people over at the agency. And we help Shopify merchants get online, stay online, grow online, that kind of thing. So we're using a lot of similar kinds of strategies from a brand perspective. And then, of course, all the tactical to get onto advertising and such.
That's amazing. Tell me more about Shopify and how it applies to the marketplace today.
Well, Shopify, if we look at it from the perspective of a platform, which is what it is, there's well over 1 million stores, maybe 1.2 million, 1.3 million stores on the Shopify platform right now. And why we chose to become a Shopify agency is because of the ecosystem. So Shopify agency meaning you have to be a Shopify store to work with us. Mm-hmm. And so the ecosystem that Shopify has been able to put together, not only for a dead simple and robust platform for you to get your online store up and running, but the ecosystem of partners, all the different apps and tools and people to help you get that store site come alive, make that store site come alive, right? And so when we have a thorough understanding of who you are as a merchant and where you want to go in the marketplace, there's a ready tool set immediately available for you. That's why Shopify is such an important platform right now.
And I love the fact that it's very user-friendly. I don't personally use Shopify, but I've been able to see people, merchants use Shopify and see the scaling in the business because you can see the real-time data. You can be able to understand your conversion traffic and your conversion events. If you convert it to your Facebook pixel, you can be able to see where people are coming from. How do you retarget those audiences to create that value that you're intending to build within a community and a culture that is set up for your business? So I love the way that you mentioned Shopify. And when you think about businesses, we know that it takes about 3 years for a business to get established as a corporation or as an established entity. But when you think about creating corporations from the perspective of growing and failing, what is the number one reasons why? Actually, let me say this. What is the number one reason why companies and organizations, and most definitely movements, because it's a community, why do they fail over a short period of time when you can actually see a vision, but you can't really imply that vision?
Well, even short periods of time, long periods of time. Sometimes, death, is not an immediate thing sometimes. If you take a look at dinosaurs, economically, we can talk about dinosaurs, so they were the relevant creatures on Earth at one time.
Yeah.
65 million years ago, the meteorite shows up. Well, that didn't wipe out all the dinosaurs immediately. It was the start of global catastrophic climate change, which killed the dinosaurs over a gradual period of time. So death isn't instantaneous sometimes. Sometimes the relevance of what you are doing simply fades away. But the very first thing to fade away is not your products. The very first thing to fade away is your story. And the very first thing to catch fire is your story. So it's the story that comes alive in your prospect's head or gradually diminishes relevance over time. And so if the very first thing, what I tell our clients is the very first thing, the absolute very first thing that anybody sells is the story.
Yeah.
Now, if people don't buy into your story, they won't buy into anything else. But it's not the story of you, hey, look at me, my products, look how great they are, look at me, how great I am. It's actually the story of your customer as hero. So the hero of the story, and we can use all sorts of different story models. There's the big one called the monomyth or the hero's journey, and you'll see that in movies like Star Wars and all the Greek myths and such, right? And there's a lot of different levels to that. But a dead simple one is what Pixar uses. And Pixar uses a very straightforward formula, and that is, here's our hero, everything was just fine, then something happened, then I had to go on a journey, and there's all sorts of ups and downs, and then we found Nemo. And everybody lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
Well, that's the same kind of story that you want to give to your clients, your prospects, and it's them as hero. Now, if they're the character as hero in that story, that means that they are coming to you for some kind of inciting incident that happened to them, and that they want you to help them out of pain and into gain. Okay, getting out of pain and into gain. So what that makes you favor is the grand, great, wise wizard. And your products and services are simply the tools to enable the promise of the story. You're giving them a magic incantation, an amulet, a sword, to help them battle through this, to get from where they want to be to where they are to where they want to be. And so the tools, the magic amulet, the incantation, all that kind of stuff, are your products and services.
Okay.
And so when you position your products and services as those magic tools, now you've got functional relevance and emotional significance in the story that your client is already telling themselves. When you tell that story, they're going to ask you, hey, where can I buy some of these things? Help me get out of pain, help me get to gain.
I love that. I really love the fact that you can be able to use those two to create that impression at the same time, because like you said with Pixar, it's more so of a problem-solving situation. And most companies, really all companies are existing because they are solving one problem. And sometimes it's hard to find that one problem without understanding what your mission and vision statement is.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. We in the Shopify agency business that we're in, we see a lot of initial merchants getting out there, and their only real hope or desire at the beginning is, can I sell a product? Maybe 10 of them.
Right.
And once they exhaust, their mother, their cousins, and their brother and sister, now we get into a bigger problem. How do we prove up the value proposition in this product so it appeals to a mass market? But if you're only in the business for making money, by itself, that's sort of a soulless business. That's what I think. And so you need that grander mission vision. Especially things, so you have a mission, vision. Google, way back when, in the mid-90s, their mission was to organize the world's information. Now, they've gotten well past that as well. But the core business, the search engine, organize the world's information. But you might actually have a moral mission as well. And that is, something beyond the transformational property that your product can do. Which is organizing the world's information. But the moral mission might be something like, to ensure, like if you go to Bill Gates, it might be something to ensure that no child experiences poverty. No child goes to bed hungry. That we never have to suffer the scourge of malaria again. Those are much bigger moral missions, because they imply a lot of things beyond a transactional dollar for a product received. Right? And that's the kind of stuff, when you engage in moral missions, it becomes bigger than just about you. It becomes bigger than the dollar for the product. And that is some of the things that really carry a beginning entrepreneur through to the other side, because they have a real understanding of what they were trying to do with the business at the very beginning. I was coaching a client of mine just a few months ago, and he was really struggling with his business. It started off like this, went up even higher than just a huge crash. Partner problems, all sorts of things, customer problems, everything else. And I questioned him about why he started the company 10 years ago. And said, Kurian, I got something for you. And he pulled out a one-pager that described in just beautiful, emotionally resonant detail why he started the business and why he called the business the name he called it. And in like 4 paragraphs, the entire vision and the emotional reasons, the spiritual reason why he started the company was right there. And why he was struggling with the company is that he completely abandoned this initial set of reasons, the initial vision, and he went to a strictly transactional, selling services for money, right? And he abandoned it, and it became a soulless operation. When it became a soulless operation, his business started imploding in on it. When he regained that initial vision, then it was a relatively simple set of steps to assemble the structure underneath him again to build the business that he originally wanted to create.
So I think from what you said, it shows me that either he was not prepared or he was prepared and he didn't understand the circumstances that would come ahead.
What's the old line? The old line is no business plan ever survives first contact with a customer.
I like that.
And it's the absolute truth. You know, the idea that you know your market before you're in the market is dead wrong the vast majority of time. And so most entrepreneurs leap in, and what they forget sometimes, and I do a lot of coaching with startup entrepreneurs, especially out in the university here. So they're experts in the technology, experts in the science, and now they're starting a company, right? And most of them did not go get their PhDs to become a salesperson or a marketer or even a product development person, right? But they've got this little business now, and what they don't really understand yet, but there's a suspicion back here as it comes together, you know, when the teeth start being bared, is that they've actually given birth to a little baby dragon. And the baby dragon needs to eat every single day. And it doesn't care where that food is coming from. So every day, you know, like even to get a small business off the ground, and this is without paying yourself, maybe $2,000 to $3,000 a month. You know, and if I take a look at, you know, some of these agencies that we work with and things like that, they're spending $150,000, $200,000 a month just to keep the lights on. So where is all that food for that agency, the baby dragon, to keep fed? And most of the time, you know, you're chasing the food. So the dragon has this huge appetite. That's your business, right? And the food's out there. It's like you quickly lose sight of this mission and vision you have, right? And you're after the food in any way it can, because otherwise the dragon is going to starve and it's going to eat you in the process. That's the problem, right? And so most people don't know what they're getting themselves into. And that's sort of a good thing, because most of them would not have taken the risk if they had known what they were getting themselves into, right? And most people can survive. You know, they can survive and they can thrive if they go out and get the right help and get the right mentorship, and they're coachable, and, you know, that they have some availability of resources.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think there's a misconception as well about people following leaders first.
Yeah.
So how does that play a role into their psyche when they're creating this practice on a consistent basis, like you said, being fed every day?
Well, we take a look at this idea, you know, like leaders are only as good as the stories they narrate. So you might come up with a story as a leader, but it's got to be a great story. So a great leader with a poor story becomes a poor leader. But a mediocre leader with a great story has the opportunity to become a great leader. And if you take a look at mass movements throughout history, you know, there may be some very prominent celebrities in that movement. We talk about, you know, Indian independence movement in the 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s in India. We talk about civil rights in the U.S. You know, you have multiple leaders all orbiting similar stories. There's core stories, there's other narratives that orbit that core story, and everybody is telling a similar set of stories. So the question becomes, who's the leader? And what I'll posit is that the leader is actually the story. And you need it to be the story, because the story will, if it has legs, outlive you. Okay, and not only will it outlive you, it will energize people who can step into leadership and then take ownership of that story. And so the movement becomes bigger than you. Okay, and it's because the story is shareable, communicable, and it is relatable that you're able to broaden it beyond just you pushing forward. Hey, listen to me, listen to me. No, now the story becomes the leader, and you happen to be one of its narrators.
It's a great place to actually create this intention every day, because like on Clubhouse, I keep talking about Clubhouse almost on every episode now, because it's an amazing platform where you can build conversations and stories. And I believe even if you think about like TEDx shows, nobody is selling anything. They're selling a story, and that story sells itself. So when you have a story like you mentioned that is so impactful, what are the stories that can impact someone, and how can they narrate that story to persuade anyone listening to them at any point in time?
Well, the stories that are the most impactful are the stories that are most relevant to your audience, and that's sort of a convoluted, circuitous way to say it. But what that really means is that you have to understand your customer, your audience, better than they understand themselves.
Okay.
Right? And at least when it comes to the context of whatever you are talking about. And for the most part, if you're an insurance salesperson, if you are a car salesperson, if you are an IT entrepreneur, information technology entrepreneur, new software, you've probably seen the current situation that your prospect is in 100 times, maybe 1,000. And so all the variations and nuances and things like that. Like, your 14-year-old daughter might come to you and say, hey, Dad, I just found a new car I can buy. When I get my permit, I'm going to buy this car. Well, great. What kind of car is it? Well, it's only $600. Now, she can only see independence, right? What you see as an adult is $600. What kind of car is this?
Right.
How am I going to maintain it? Is it going to fall apart? Where are you going to park it? How are you going to afford insurance? And it's all these things that you know better than your daughter knows, because your daughter's only thinking about it from a beginner's lens.
Yeah.
Okay, and does not understand the situational context that she's getting herself in. So when it comes to understanding all these things, you have to understand the deep motives that are going through your customer's head, and the narratives that they are already telling themselves. And the narrative that they're telling themselves may not be the one you want them saying. You may not want them telling themselves, right? Because they may be very naive and very simplistic, and the situation they're getting themselves into may be fraught with a lot more opportunity and danger. Right? So we have to be able to, again, this puts you back in that role of that wise wizard. You know the situational context better than anybody else. And you know all the traps in the path ahead of them, the journey ahead of them. You know all the opportunities. You know that they should rest here, climb that, don't go over there, all of those kinds of things. And you really become a mentor to them in that process. And through that mentorship, you will provide them with that tool set, to get them from pain into gain.
Exactly. I love that. Speaking of concepts, what would you say are the 7 pillars and the 7 primary pillars of culture, and how do they work to drive an organization forward at any level?
Sure. Well, culture, ultimately what we say is the best definition of culture I've ever heard is the knowledge used to survive and thrive in an environment. So knowledge, culture is knowledge. And in my book, so I wrote a book last year called The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell, which is where you're pulling this front portion of the culture right? And the culture, you infuse it with the 7 stories. The 7 pillars, you infuse with the 7 stories to make your business, your enterprise, your organization come alive. So the 7 pillars, they are the always-on operating system. The always-on operating system that guides behavior in the organization, even when there's no one to watch, reward, or punish that behavior. Your people know what to do. They know what's expected. They know what not to do, right? They know what the direction they're going. So these 7 pillars are present whether you want them to be or not. The question for you as a leader is, have you deliberately engineered these 7 pillars in order to produce the outcomes you want your organization to achieve?
Yeah.
So I'll give you the 7 pillars. Pillar one is the social organization. Is this a flat structure? Is it a hierarchical structure? What is your place in those structures? Is it an anarchy? That could be social structure. It could be it could be everybody for themselves, right? Which is also a form of government. But people need to know how they fit. What their roles are, what their status levels are, below them, above them, what they can aspire to. And there's nothing worse than an employee that doesn't think that there's opportunity for them in the organization, and that's just going to be bad news for them and bad news for you. Pillar two is all about language and writing. So what's the verbiage? What's the vernacular used, terminology that is part of the insider language? So when you use certain types of verbs and adjectives, nouns, you can quickly identify who's in and who's out. So if I was in the commercial real estate business, for example, I might use the acronym TIs. Hey, we got to get those TIs down. We got to get those TIs up. Well, to an insider, TIs means tenant improvements or tenant improvement allowance.
Yeah.
Right, which is some kind of a cash incentive to build out your premises. Well, somebody outside that organization may not know what that is, but it is immediately identifiable internally. Here in my hometown, we have a global world-class pet food manufacturing operation called Champion Pet Foods. They absolutely deliberately, and they ruthlessly enforce the calling of their factories. Don't call it that. It's a kitchen. It's a kitchen. Kitchens produce food. Factories produce pellets. And they produce kibble pellets, right? And in fact, they produce dog food that is human grade. So it's very high end. It comes out of a kitchen. There's no factory here. Okay. And I've been in presentations with them where they corrected me because my default is to call it a factory. No, Kurian, it's a kitchen. It's a
right.
Kitchen. So third pillar is religion. Now, people sometimes get a little concerned, Kurian, you're mixing up a business with religion, I don't want to. But we're not talking about religion in the way of what you worship as a god. Hopefully you're not worshiping the boss as a god, right? It's probably time for you to leave if that's what's being demanded of you. But religion in this sense means what you worship in the highest values of the organization. So what are the highest priorities, values of the organization? What are the traditions of that organization? There's a lot of things that happen in religion that are absolute cues for marketing. In fact, the best marketing takes its cues from the best religions. And I don't want to say best religions, the most prominent religions. Because religion, Judaism has been around perhaps for about 5,000 years now, perhaps, right? Christianity has been around for a little over 2,000 years. Islam since the 600s, something like that. The reason these religions are so prominent is because their stories are so communicable. They have highly relevant, functionally relevant, emotionally significant, spiritually come alive stories. And in fact, you can't describe any one of those three religions. And those three religions are amongst the thousands of religions that have ever existed. And there's still hundreds more that exist today, but in very fractional form. No one really hears of the Zoroastrians anymore, right? But they're around. They used to be a very prominent religion at one time. So what makes these religions prominent is that they have highly communicable stories, and they tell their adherents to move those stories forward, proselytize, tell everyone the stories. And that's how you bring everybody into that tent. So religion is all about, what are the values and how do we communicate those values, and what are the ceremonies around those values, what are the sacred texts around those values, all that kind of stuff. What is the big story? Okay, pillar four is all about forms of government. And by the way, how are we doing here? Is this
This is good. Yeah, I'm actually enjoying this. I'm listening.
Pillar four is all about forms of government. And forms of government is simply about the way we make decisions around here. And the decisions, is this group consensus? Is it a democracy? Is it an autocracy? As long as everybody knows how decisions are being made, everybody can choose to be a part of that process or to bow out. In fact, none of these pillars are either right or wrong. You can do whatever you want of them. As long as everybody understands what the pillar is, and how it operates. So, the only way you get ahead around here is by being related to the boss. Or the only way you get ahead around here is by doing great work, which is a meritocracy. Now, both of those are perfectly fine as long as everybody knows how you get ahead around here. It's only when the nephew says, hey, why did Bob get promoted? And they say, well, Bob's doing great work. But I'm your nephew. And at that point in time, his understanding of the rule set has been violated.
Right.
You see where I'm going? And conversely, I'm doing great work, but the no good nephew, is being promoted. It's been something that's been violated. The culture is all about the understanding, the knowledge you use to survive and thrive. Okay, pillar 5 is all about economics. And economics is how you create value. And each one of your people should be able to tell anybody how your business creates value. What are the inputs? What are the outputs? What are the processes in between to take that input, create products and services around it, and put something out in the marketplace for someone to buy? And so if they can't do that, then they really don't understand the organization. They really don't understand the business. Because how do you know what that value is and your relationship to the contribution of that value? And even the receptionist at the front desk, has a contribution to the final output of the firm. And it's just, she needs to understand how that fits. At the very least, your top people, your top level C-suite and perhaps the level or two underneath it needs to understand and be able to relate that in a functional way. Otherwise, they can't possibly contribute to that value creation in a way that is significant. They're just doing their job instead of committing their heart, mind, and soul.
Yeah.
You know where I'm going with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Pillar 6 is all about the arts. And the arts in this case is about taking that core utility of value, whatever that core utility is, and lifting it to the level of an art. Okay? So you can have a hot dog. A hot dog is a hot dog. You boil it up, put it into a bun. But imagine what that hot dog could become in the hands of a world-class chef like Wolfgang Puck. Would you expect it just to be, it will be grand, it'll be grandiose. It will be a culinary experience in the hand of an artist.
Yeah.
And so we want to take that core value and bring it up like this. And, one of the most relatable stories of that is that before the iPhone came along, you had a choice of all these brick-looking phones from Nokia and BlackBerry. BlackBerry is a smartphone, but wow, when I saw that iPhone, it's not only the aesthetic appeal of the design, but it's also the aesthetic of the way the software works. This idea of everything. Wow, this just all snaps together, and they have outthought me in the way I will interact with it. It is an artistic rendering, and it is an artful experience to me.
Yeah.
So you want to lift it to the level of art, and we all have that opportunity with anything and everything we're doing. So we can do the bare minimum to deliver the core utility, or we can deliver the level of an art. And the final pillar 7, is all about customs and tradition. And the customs and tradition part is, what do we understand as the legacy of our culture? What do we celebrate on a regular basis? So we celebrate things like Thanksgiving. We celebrate things like, Mother's Day, Father's Day, certainly religious festivals of various kinds, Easter, Christmas, all those kinds of things. And our lives would be much poorer if we didn't have these customs and tradition, because they reinforce the values. They reinforce the values, and they may reinforce the government. They reinforce the other pillars. So in a lot of ways, this is the glue that keeps these other 6 pillars together, because we now come around and celebrate. We venerate. And so those 7 pillars, they work together. They work together. And when they work together and you infuse them with 7 stories, everything comes alive. And so the organizations that you really see, talked about these days and are actually delivering a bottom line as well. Take a look at Apple now. And Apple came back from, what they thought was the abyss, right? When the Jobs first came back. And it's a $2.4 trillion company now. Who would have guessed that? How do they do that? The ultimate thing about these kind of companies is the stories they tell, which results in the products they deliver. Right? You tell a stupid story, you deliver stupid products.
Facts.
Now, great stories, the imagination stories of what could be, and you embody it in a product, everything comes alive. I want that. I didn't know I wanted an iPad until I saw an iPad. I thought I wanted a smaller laptop. Right? But when I saw that iPad, wow, I want that iPad. And it was something that triggered in the back of your head, and everything, all the lights came on at the same time. That's the product I'm buying.
And it's amazing that you mentioned that. I love that you said that, because if you didn't know about something till you find it, that's when you need it the most. It's not that it wasn't existing before. It's just that you were not aware of its existence. And that's where the thin line is drawn.
That is where the thin line is drawn. You know, in a lot of ways, people live in what I call latent pain. The latent pain is simply, they live with it because they don't think it's a solution. When you have active pain, you come out and you see the tire in your car low, you say, I'll fill it up a little later. But the next day you come out and you see the tire in your car flat. Now that becomes an active pain. You're going to have to go and fill that car up. And a lot of times, I had a latent pain with that, with my laptop. I wanted something smaller to take along with me. And I just couldn't find something with enough RAM and enough battery life. But when that iPad came along, bang, it just happened. My latent pain became an active pain, and I went and bought the product to solve my pain. Because now I have a solution for it. And you can take a look at that as well, Faber, in various types of social movements as well.
Yeah.
All sort of, whether it's LGBTQ or Black Lives Matter or anything that's going on, even democracy, with who gets to vote. I thought everybody got to vote in a democracy, right? Those kinds of things, when people philosophically say, and this is a philosophical thing even, right? When people say this is wrong, okay, and this is how we make it right, you are going to quickly test whether the population has that as a story in their heads. Because what they do at the very beginning, when I say story, it starts with a big idea. Then it comes to a set of key messages, and then it comes alive in a strategic narrative, right? So they buy into the big idea, then tell me more. Those are the key messages, and then it's the strategic narrative that they buy into. And then it's only after they bought into those three things as part of the overall narrative that they are able to buy into your products and services.
I love that. Now, it really tells me a lot about storytelling. Think about Apple, like the events, like just the previous event they just had. When you look at every keynote presentation, one thing is certain and is always consistent: simplicity. Like that Picha Kucha kind of presentation is so very much appealed to the audience based on design, rather than having over 20% of text in the image. And it really sends a message because people are able to understand what is being spoken of so they can visualize it for themselves without being forced to read, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And the iPod, when it first came out, not even in a flash drive, but in the little micro disk.
Yeah.
So it's a micro hard drive, right? The simplest big idea was 10,000 songs in your pocket. That was the big idea. That's one of their big ideas, right? And around that iPod. And that now ignites people's imagination as to what's possible. And when you ignite people's imagination, they will be actively seeking for that solution.
That's deep. I love that. I really, really love that. Now, the last question I want to ask, and this is very important to the 7 pillars that you just mentioned. How does someone that's listening to this right now create their own 7 stories to move people, to move emotions, to move mountains, to move stories, like stories that they can tell, that people can tell others? How can they put all this together and stay consistent to their brand value?
Sure. We didn't talk a lot about the stories today, but I'm going to send you an infographic around the 7 stories to create and such.
Okay.
Right? And by the way, I'm also going to, for the first 5 of your listeners that tell me that they heard me on your show, I'm going to send them a free Kindle copy of the book.
Okay.
Right? So 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell. You can find it on Amazon today. these 7 stories, I'm going to quickly just rattle them off for you. Then I'm going to send you the infographic and such, right? But these stories are primal. These are stories that your people and your clients are actively searching for in their heads to come to a resolution about what you are all about, what your meaning is all about. The 7 stories are creation, origin, how did you begin? Our identity, values, and beliefs. What are our highest priorities? Okay, what are our absolute understandings of the world? Even if we can't prove it. Even if we can't prove it, but we know it to be true. That's a belief, right? Beliefs are something you know to be true, but you can't prove to be true.
Correct.
The big idea, the central organizing concept that brings everything we do to orbit around the central idea, that central sun, right? Everything else is in orbit. The planets around that orbit of that sun. The enemy we face, and that can be, it doesn't have to be an individual, but it can be a challenge. So it's a challenge to overcome. It can be something that we fight for or fight against. So what is the enemy we face? Nothing gets people moving more rapidly with more energy than to show them a very potent enemy in front of them. Mm-hmm. And that enemy can be as simple as graft. It can be bribery, corruption. It can be that. In the 80s and 90s, it was the war on drugs. Haven't won that one yet. Right? But it's a central organizing idea on this enemy that we face. But we need something that we are either fighting for or fighting against. Story 5 is all about the mighty winds. And the mighty winds are all about the prevailing macro trends that will power your sail ship. It's not a powerboat, it's a sail ship. Either forward, or you are fighting against it, you're counter to the wind, or if the wind refuses to billow the ship sails at all. And these macro winds, most people go out and build a company without really understanding the macro trends that are prevailing, right? The macro trends are things like societal trends, technological trends, economic, environmental, political, legislative trends. If you are with the wind, your ship is going to be buoying forward. You're against the wind, the ship will be capsized. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter, right? Prior to the internal combustion engine in the 1880s, 1870s, there were actually cars built with steam and battery technology, right? And it just happened to be that electricity, the electrical grid, especially in the United States, just couldn't be pushed out as far in the 1910s, 1920s as service stations for gasoline fuel.
Yeah.
And that's why the internal combustion engine took off, because you could get that to rural America much faster than the electrical grid, the entire thing to do it. And so at that point in time, you don't want to be betting on battery technology cars, even though they were around. You might do it today, but in the ensuing 80, 90, 100 years, you would have been an absolute multi-millionaire, maybe billionaire by investing in internal combustion technology. That's where all the fortunes were made. So we want to really understand what those wins are. Those first 5 stories are like the left side of the equation. And if all those 5 stories are believable, then there's an equal sign, and then you say, well, then if that's true, this is the journey we must undertake. And so this is what we got to do now, and we either, if we stand still, we're going to die. Because the world's always changing, right? The technology is always changing, so you have to keep moving forward. So stagnation is not an option. So we got to move forward, and here's the direction we're going to move forward in. And finally, story 7 is the why we will win story. And the why we will win story takes all the previous 6 stories, puts them all together, and adds what we call keystone elements. And keystones are what ensure the win. Mm-hmm. So it's one telling, and now we have a keystone, at least one, maybe more, that will ensure your people of the win. And here's some keystone elements. Superior people, superior technology, superior strategy. God is with us. Death will be upon us. So death ground, if we don't do something, that's a keystone, right? That's a great story. In 1519, Hernan Cortez fled Cuba with 630 men to land on the shores of Veracruz in modern-day Mexico. And he wanted to conquer the Aztec Empire for himself before the governor of Cuba, his brother-in-law, Diego's last name was But he was Diego Velasquez, I believe. And he wanted that glory for himself. And so he lands with 630 men on the shores. He scuttles a couple of his ships and sends another one home. Okay? And now his men are on the beach and they have no choice but to follow him. Because what he said is, back there in Cuba is death ground. Okay? And death ground, there's mutiny charges.
Wow.
You might be hung. In fact, you are probably going to be hung, right? And so in front of us, though, if we stay here, we're also going to die. But in front of them was over 200,000 square kilometers of Aztec territory and 5 million Aztecs. 5 million Aztecs. And what happened because of the death ground and, the sudden motivation that takes over, and then some good political dealings with the other Indian tribes around it to create alliances. 2 years later, in 1521, the entire Aztec Empire surrendered to Cortez and his allied forces. And that's the kind of power that you will have in the Why We Will Win story when you infuse it with those kinds of keystone elements. So, and there's plenty of stories like that all over the place. But these 7 stories, here's what really goes on. You take those 7 stories, you infuse them into that culture, and you make the entire place come alive. If you don't deliberately do it, your people are going to tell their own stories. They may not be the stories you want them to tell. To tell themselves, right? So you have to be very deliberate about this, because when you put it all together, it is a self-correcting, self-propelling machine that you will create. There's the direction. Here's why we do it. Here's how we do it. Here's the energy, fuel, and all the initiatives around getting forward in that direction. And people come alive on their own. Leadership then becomes, simply pointing now, okay? Instead of whipping and cajoling and dragging, which is a lot of what poor leaders do. Okay? Wouldn't you rather have it the other way? And that's why I wrote the book.
It's amazing that you said that, because with poor communication comes stress, and you can hear stress in someone's voice. And with brand consistency, you can be able to disseminate that information to many people as quickly as possible, because there's one outstanding feature. And it's like you mentioned, if you can't tell that story will tell itself in a different way, just like a broken telephone. So you want to keep that same consistent story with the same tone, so that the right person can feel that emotion when it's being spoken about. And when someone hears something, they kind of understand what is being said, but if they don't feel emotionally attached to it, it's like a passive text. So you don't want to be that kind of person.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a brand is nothing without emotional significance.
Oh, yeah.
And the brand narrative is basically what we're doing here. This is a leadership book. But the opposite side of it, it is actually a book about market leadership as well. These are the same kind of stories and cultural elements you have to infuse into the marketplace. And so it's the opposite side of the same coin. Exactly.
I believe that too. Wow. Definitely, these are the 7 pillars of culture that people will definitely need to take in. Make sure you take notes, rewind this podcast, rewind this vodcast. Make sure you're able to understand what we're talking about here, because this is where value is poured into. This is what is going to save you 5 years, 10 years. You need to understand that what you plant today is what is going to grow tomorrow. And those things are very simple, practical applications, but people don't take them practically. They just think, oh yeah, I'll wait till tomorrow, and tomorrow never comes. So you always have to stay consistent. And I love those 7 pillars. I can't wait I can't wait to see the infographics. I can't wait to see that thing, because I can't wait to at least understand that it's not about what you see, it's about how you see it. And that there's a big difference between those two, and I really appreciate you for that, Kurian.
Really good favor. Once again, for the first 5 of your listeners that email me at Kurian@strategypeak.com, I'll get that for your show notes. And tell me that they saw me on your show. I'm going to send them a free copy of the Kindle book.
Awesome. And how else can people connect with you? How can they find you?
So you can come and you can find me at strategypeak.com. So strategy as in mountain peak, one word, .com. And there's over 100 blog posts all about marketing and strategy there. You're going to have a good time just romping through that. Take a look at my book on Amazon. It's called The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell. It's not very expensive. And download that infographic that we're going to put up on Favor's site, and you will get going on this right away.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Catch us in the show notes. Listen to pod.link/we don't play to get all your podcasts all the time, same place. We're here every week. Even now on podcasts on Apple, it says that we update our podcast semi-weekly. That's a big word. Semi-weekly just means that we are always here to stay. We're always here to add value. So make sure you catch up, because these episodes are going nowhere. Thank you so much, Kurian, for being here. You have added so much knowledge, and I hope other people can be able to apply this to their daily lives on a daily basis.
Favor, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime.